Good day again, everyone. Welcome back to the vlog. My name's Leigh and I'm a professional poker player from Melbourne, Australia. About a year ago, I started vlogging myself as a live 2-5 grinder, but because coronavirus caused casino to shut down, I had to transition over to online poker. At the moment, I'm grinding 100 NL games. I've been mixing between 9-handed games and 6-handed games, trying to get back into 6-handed games full time just because I do find them more fun. And today, we got another session with a mixture of the two. We definitely run into plenty of interesting spots. Before we look at how I play during the session, let's hop into the results straight away. So here we go, this is the session that we did play yesterday, and I did get in a total of 1,289 hands, so about the same amount of hands as I played in the previous session. Still not quite back to that 1,500 hand mark, but to be honest, I'm kind of glad that I did leave the session early, because as you can see, I did end up losing 376 across the session, so obviously wasn't running the best this session, but short-term various, it comes and goes. What's more important is how I played, and we've got the most interesting hand histories from the session, which really do highlight how I played in the session. So let's hop into the analysis and get things going. Let's kick things off with a bit of 9-handed action. We get a post under the gun from an unknown player. This would be their first hand at the table. So they go ahead and check, and then the action's on me in +2 with ace-king, and already I make a bit of a mistake. I raise it up to 3, which is my standard raise size. With a poster in the mix checking, I really should be going to my standard ISO size, which is 5. So clearly I wasn't paying attention, and I just assumed they were the big blind. So not a great start to the session, already making mistakes. Regardless though, the action gets to a loose aggressive middle position player, they throw in the call, then it gets back around to the original poster, and they call as well. So we're 3 ways to a flop of 8-5-4 with 2 hearts. When the under the gun checks it over to me, I think against 2 opponents, I have a pretty standard decision to check back here. If I was heads up against either of the opponents, I would consider c-betting since I have the backdoor nut flush draw and 2 overs, but against 2 people, I think it's very easy for either of them to have at least 1 pair on this flop, so I don't expect to get many folds with a bet. So I check it over to the least aggressive opponent, and then he does fire at it. He bets half the size of the pot, under the gun folds, and I think here we have a pretty easy decision to call. This is a loose aggressive opponent, so I'm going to expect them to have a lot of like Broadway type hands in their range, so Queen Jack, Queen 10, and those hands are probably just going to stab at it. Just because they are loose aggressive, they're going to try and get a fold, and we're going to be ahead of a lot of those hands with ace high. But even if my opponent does have a stronger hand like an 8, then we're going to have outs to improve to stronger pair. So I do decide to throw in the call, and we're still heads up to the turn, which is a repeat 8, the 8 of diamonds. I check it over to the villain, then they keep betting at it, they go half pot again, and now I think we have a pretty interesting decision, because this turn card is kind of good for us, because it does block the amount of combinations of top pair my opponent can have. Having said that though, the fact they did bet small, and they're going to know I have a lot of ace high hands in my range, they could just be going for an even thinner value bet. They could definitely have like pocket 6s, or maybe even ace 5 that they're just betting smaller with to try and get called by ace high. And then there's also somewhat the possibility that they did flop a straight, or a set, or they could just be betting smaller with an 8. Not really sure what they're doing, but the fact they are loose aggressive and we unblock a lot of their hands that are going to be bluffs, the 10-9, the Jack-10, I think we can still call here with ace high, and that's what I decide to do. Type in the comments below, let me know what you would do on this street. So we heads up to the river, which is a beautiful river. It's the ace of spades. Now it's my decision, and I think it's pretty interesting whether I want to lead out here. I want to check it over to the opponent. The main reason I would like leading out here is if my opponent was going for one of those thinner value bets on the turn with like pocket 6s, they might call a really small bet here. But then again, they might just fold that hand. So I think checking is the superior play. They're a loose aggressive opponent, and Jack-10 and stuff all miss, so they could bluff with one of those hands. But also we have the ace of hearts, so we know our opponent wasn't betting off with the nut flush draw, so that's not going to be a hand we can get value from. If I had ace king of clubs, for instance, I'll prefer a lead just because I think my opponent's going to have more worse aces in their range that can pay us off. So I go ahead and check it over to them, hoping to induce a bluff, and then they rip it all in. So pretty concerned when they rip it all in, knowing that they're going to know that we have a bunch of ace high hands in our range. But I mean, we played this whole hand to induce bluffs, so we can't chicken out now just because they did bet really big on the river. So I do throw in the call, and then the opponent shows us the bad news. They did flop a set with pocket 4s, so they're going to scoop in this one. Hop in the comments below, let me know what you think of my line. Calling down light did not work out. So more nine-handed action. It's round to me in the small blind with king 10 offsuit. I go ahead and raise it up to 4, and then a loose passive big blind calls. So we're heads up to a flop of ace 9 6 rainbow, and I've talked about it probably a million times on this vlog about having range bets on ace high ballers when you are the pre-flop aggressor. The only instance I don't like doing it is against loose passive opponents, just because I think they overcall a lot, and I think they have a lot of ace-x hands in their range. I mean, this is small blind versus big blind, so they naturally would have a bunch of ace-high hands in their range anyway. I think against those type of opponents, you're probably just better off checking with a lot of your weaker hands, just because you're not going to get the folds. I decided to range bet in this spot, which I do think is a mistake. I think, again, I'm sort of like not fully dialed in and paying attention on autopilot mode a bit, kind of like I was pre-flop in the last hand. So there's definitely a lot of cracks in my game this session so far. I go ahead and bet 3, then my opponent does call. So we're still off to the turn, which is the 10 of spades. Pretty good turn for us. We do make a pair here, but like I said, I think my opponent does have a bunch of ace-x hands in their range, and I'm not going to try and bluff them off it when I do have showdown value, and they probably do have hands like 9-8, 8-7, stuff like that. So I go ahead and check it over to them, and then they check it back. So off to the river. There's a beautiful river if I ever saw one. We river trips with the 10 of hearts, and now we just have a decision. What size do we want to value bet? And I think this is a slam dunk spot to go ahead and overbet. The pot's pretty small, so even an overbet, like overbets are scary, but I think it's going to be super scary to turn my opponent off from calling. And the reason I like overbetting here is because I still think my opponent has a lot of ace-x hands in their range. Like if they called in the big blind with ace-2 offsuit, I think it's very likely they would check back the turn, concerned that they're going to value own themselves, trying to induce bluffs, stuff like that. And I think a loose passive opponent's going to call with all the aces in their range, and I think they have a lot. So I decide to go for the overbet here. I make it 19. Happy that I did overbet here, because then my opponent throws in the call, and we're going to end up scooping this one. My opponent did have an ace-x hand, and happy that I made that read on the river. Just wish I tuned in earlier and didn't make that inefficiency bet. So finally, we've got some 6 max in the action. I'm under the gun with 10-9 of clubs. I go ahead and open it up to 3. Then a loose aggressive opponent goes ahead and 3-bets me in MP to 10. When the action gets back around to me, we're getting a great priced call considering how ridiculously deep we are, which is what I decide to do. I will say, I think you should consider 4-bet bluffing here sometimes, particularly against a loose aggressive opponent, but calling absolutely fine with 10-9 suited. So we go heads up to a flop. Pretty good flop. It's Jack 10 7, so we do make middle pair. I go ahead and check it over to the opponent. Then they go ahead and check back. So when they check back, I do think that they are going to have just a lot of ace high hands, a lot of stuff like pocket eights, just more of a showdown driven range. Just because they're a loose aggressive opponent, I think they're going to be bluffing at this pot a lot with a lot of their like ace 5 suited, stuff like that. So when they check back, I do think they have some type of showdown value. So we're off to the turn. Bang a turn for us. We do make a straight on the 8 of diamonds. It's a 4-liner to a straight, but when the action's on me, I definitely want to go ahead and bet it here. This is a great card for my range. I'm going to have way more 9s than my opponent. Like I said, I do think my opponent's check back range on the flop is a bit showdown driven, so they are going to have, a lot of pocket 9s, probably 10-9 suited themselves. But that's about it. I think they're the only 9s we have, so we do actually have the straight in this spot, so it's a good idea to go ahead and bet it. But if we did have a bluff, say we had king, queen, that'd be a great hand to bluff with actually, or even like pocket 6s, like it'd be a really good spot to bluff with those hands just because we can very credibly represent straights on this board. So I go ahead and bet 14, then my opponent throws in the call, which is good news. Like I said, I think their range was showdown driven. They definitely could have straight themselves. They could have pocket 8s. Somewhat possible they checked pocket jacks on the flop or even an overpair. So absolutely loving them when we get a call. So we're off to the river, but it's a pretty bad river actually. It's the 10 of diamonds, which does complete the backdoor flush draw as well as make full houses on the board. So when the action's on me here, I actually think the best play probably is to check, just to try and induce a bluff from the opponent. But then again, like, what are they going to bluff with? Like, are they going to turn an overpair into a bluff? Like, no, they're just going to check that hand back. I don't think they're going to call a bet with, an overpair here either. So it's a pretty awkward spot, to be honest. I decided to bet out to try and value target an overpair, but I think that's a mistake. I don't think, pocket aces is ever going to call a bet this large. So yeah, I think this is a pretty inefficient bet. And I mean, I don't know what the right play is. Maybe a bit smaller to try and get value from an overpair. Maybe just end up check calling to chop with a 9. The problem is they are going to have so many full houses like pocket jacks, pocket 8s. they're actually going to have a few like nut flushes. Like I said, I sort of assume that they would c-bet with like the ace-5 of diamonds type hands, but not necessarily. They could check ace-5 of diamonds, ace-queen of diamonds, ace-king of diamonds. So I think they're going to have a lot of nut flushes as well. So when they go ahead and raise here, very gross spot, but I think we have to fold. Like I do credibly believe that they have the flushes and the full houses, so I just can't pay them off. It is a loose aggressive opponent, so maybe they're turning like pocket aces with the ace of diamonds into a bluff, but don't really expect it that often. And river raises are nutted at 100 NL, so I think I can get away with a fold here. Just yeah, pretty confusing river spot. Really didn't like my betting on the river, but there's not a lot of options I do like in this spot on the river. So hope in the comments let me know what you would do here. Very awkward spot. So back to the 9-handed games. I'm on the button with pocket queens. I go ahead and open it up to 3. Then a tight aggressive big blind calls. So it heads up to a flop of ace king 4 with 2 clubs. When the opponent checks it over to me, this is kind of an interesting spot. It's an ace high board, so I should consider range c betting, but the fact it's an ace king high board, even more so, I think I should be c-betting here. So many of the bluffing hands in our range are going to benefit from multiple barrels on this street, because like our range is so nutted here. We have all the aces, all the kings, even the ace 4 suiteds and stuffs. My opponent has so many less of those hands just because they're going to be 3-betting, a lot of them pre-flop. It's a board we can just absolutely run over. The problem with this specific hand is if any hand isn't going to benefit from a c-bet, it's probably this hand. There's no equity for us to deny. We're not going to fold out a better hand with, you know, just a bet on just a single bet now. Like we'd have to put in multiple barrels, but we have so much showdown value. Like, do we really want to bluff with this hand when we have like, you know, much better hands like 9-10 or 6-7, stuff like that we can bluff with? So yeah, it's a pretty awkward spot with this hand specifically, but when we take a strategy where we're just going to have to range bet, going to have to do it even with the hands it's more awkward to do it with. Otherwise we're going to be inconsistent and we're going to be giving away tells, and this is a tight aggressive opponent, so I think they're a bit more capable and they might understand stuff like that. So I do decide to go ahead and bet 2, then my opponent calls. So we're off to the turn, which is a king of spades. The opponent goes ahead and checks it to me, and I think I just have to check back now. I could potentially bet out to get value from like a flush draw, but we have the queen of clubs, so we kind of block that anyway. So I think this is a good spot to sort of just try and take our showdown value and check. So we're off to the river, which is the 6 of spades. My opponent goes ahead and leads out 7. So the actions I mean, this is a pretty interesting spot. I do think my opponent's going to have a lot of ace x and king x hands, so definitely could just see going ahead and folding here, but I actually think this is a really good spot to bluff raise. And the reason is my opponent has a lot of ace x and king x hands, but they don't have as many as I do, and they definitely don't have the nutted hands like pocket aces, ace king. So it might actually be a really good spot to represent a very polarized range, but one of those nut hands, just because we block king queen really hard, which is really good in this spot as well. It's a really good blocker to have. I think they're just going to be weighted more towards those ace x hands, and those hands are not going to be able to call off a raise. But even if they are, we want to put them to the test. So I go ahead and raise it up to 28, and I do really like this play with the queen blocker. Much less likely they're going to call off with a king, so I go ahead and make it 28, and then my opponent's in the tank for probably like 5 seconds before throwing in the fold. So absolutely stoked to be able to take this pot down, and out of all the hands I've played so far in the vlog, this one's definitely my favourite. So we got one last hand to run over in this vlog, and the action's on a very short stacked loose passive player in the hijack, and they go ahead and open limp. Then I'm in the cutoff with pocket 9s, great spot to ISO raise, really trying to get as close to all in as I possibly can with the short stack. So I go ahead and make it 5. Then things get to a tight passive player in the small blind, and they decide to cold call. And usually when a player cold calls in the small blind, it's usually a bit of a looser range, but this player in particular, I do think it's a pretty tight range. And part of the reason I think that is because we do have a short stack here that might limp raise all in, so they could even be trapping with like aces and kings. So pretty concerned about this range, but even conventionally, I think it's going to have a lot of like strong suited Broadway type stuff, definitely pocket 10s, pocket jacks. So they go ahead and cold call, and then the original limper calls as well. So we're 3 ways to a flop, bang a flop for us, queen jack 9 rainbow, and then things are on the loose passive player, and they actually decide to lead out for 8, which we're kind of loving when we have bottom set. Then things get even better because the short stack just rips their set all in. Now the action's on me, and I really don't like raising actually, and that's just because I think the small blind, they're going to have a lot of hands like ace queen or those overpairs in their range. They're going to get pretty scared off if I go over the top here. So I think a lot of those hands are just going to fold to that raise, and we really don't want to give them the opportunity to do that. If we just call, I think they're going to continue with all of those hands. So I do just decide to call here, and then the action's back on the tight passive player. They don't decide to call, they decide to rip it all in for 127. Now the action's back on me, and I am very concerned now. I really don't think they're ever going to do this with aces and kings. I think the chances that they have king 10 here are extremely likely. King 10 suited probably, even the fact that they are tight passive, and yeah, I'm almost pretty sure I'm behind, but the problem is we're getting such a good price to call with two straights still to come. The chances that we make a full house are very likely. So if they showed us king 10, like, we probably have to call anyway, but the problem is they might have a stronger set in their range. I said that they might trap pre-flop with queens or jacks. They might just standardly call with pocket jacks and pocket queens pre-flop because they're a tight passive player. So if we give our opponent a range of hands that is straights and stronger sets, we actually have a fold here with pocket nines as tight as it seems. And against a tight passive opponent, I don't think they're overvaluing overpair. I don't think they're just doing this with a bluff with like jack 10 suited or something. I think they just either have a straight or a stronger set, and I think folding's the best play. I don't think they're overvaluing queen jack either, by the way. So yeah, I mean, I should just be folding here. I know I'm behind. I'm almost positive of it. And then I throw in the call, which, pretty disappointed I didn't end up doing this. And by the way, I'm really not concerned about this opponent. I think they just have like king queen or, you know, 9-10, some straight draw or something. Really not concerned about them. Heavily concerned about them. Almost positive I'm behind them. And I really should just be folding with that read. Even though I throw in the call, and then we see what the small blind has, and it was pocket jacks, so we're almost drawing dead when we get it all in on the flop, and that's even worse than if they did have king 10. Like, we would rather they have king 10, because at least then we can make a full house. Now we're just drawing to one out, and to be honest, like, hop in the comments, let me know if you would call off in this spot as well. If you're like, I just never fold at flop sets, particularly on the flop, like, I totally understand that, and I can hear you out on it. I just really think myself, with the read I had on this opponent, I should be able to get away from my set here, and I am absolutely kicking myself for paying off in such a big pot. So those were the most interesting hands we played across the session, and in terms of my gameplay grade, you can tell I'm already dreading it because I'm going to give myself a C. I do like some of the things I did in this session. The overbet spot with the trip 10s, I think I got max value there, so pretty happy with that. A lot of the other hands though, I really do think like I wasn't fully keyed in. I sort of was on autopilot for a lot of it, just missing like that pre-flop thing with the ace king, and then, you know, just range betting like a monkey, just range betting on, you know, the ace high board with the king 10 hand. I really don't think like I need to be doing things like that, and if I was keyed in and focused on playing my A game, I would not have been. And I mean, the most egregious mistake would be with the pocket nines. I mean, maybe it's not the most egregious mistake. I did flop a set. Maybe they're doing it with a worse hand, but I really don't think so. I really think if I was dialed in, I would be able to make that exploit fold. So very disappointed, but you know, I do like my bluff with the pocket queens and stuff. So there's a few good things, so I can't go to the absolute pits of hell with my gameplay grade, but definitely going to have to give myself a bad grade when I was on autopilot a lot. So I ended up landing on a C for today. That's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Hop down in the comments and absolutely roast me, because I think I deserve it after playing so poor in this session, and I probably need a good spanking on the ass to turn me back around. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button and get these hands as they come out. I really do want to prove to you that I can play poker well sometimes, so I do that in some of these vlogs, and if you hit subscribe, you'll be able to find out when the vlogs come out, and you'll get to see my play, well, hopefully improve, but if it gets worse, you'll get to see the shit show as well. So hit that subscribe button. Also, leave a thumbs up on this video, and then go over to Instagram and follow me on Leigh for my interactive hand histories. For now, I'm out of here. Peace.